Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are joined by the elite, and elite with a capital E, apologist, John Fisher 2.0. Now, John Fisher 2.0 is a Catholic apologist, as I said, and his specialty, he's no stranger to the show. I've had him on multiple times, and his specialty in terms of apologetics is stuff to do with like sacraments, if they're valid or not, or illicit or whatever. And so I've brought him on to answer a popular objection, most commonly by one Father Anthony Cekada. Now, a lot of Sedevacantists like to make this argument, and however, they're just parroting the words of Anthony Cekada, who passed away about a year ago, a very famous Sedevacantist. And basically what he is arguing is the rite of ordination, also known as the Ordinal, from 1968 is invalid, and all the consecrations using that or ordination using that is as useless as Anglican orders, according to Leo the 13th. So we will be taking that to task, and I'm very thankful that John is here, because I know no one else who can to combat this kind of stuff. But since John's an expert in this stuff, that's why he's here. So, John, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for inviting me here to talk about the issue.
Okay, and I'm just curious, how are the state of lockdowns in your city, or pandemic stuff?
Right, so they're a little better because now we can travel out of province. The church, so that's pretty good. You can still go to the churches. You just need to submit to the diocese or to your local church that, hey, I would like to come over for this mass at this time, and as long as you're one of the first, then you can do that. So it's not too terrible. And hopefully there are going to be some short-term plans, from what I heard, of going maskless, at least in supermarkets. But I'm not sure how close that's going to be, or whether or not, just because the government doesn't mandate it, that businesses won't. So that I'm a little less sure of, but so far it's not too terrible.
So to go in a non-essential business, do you need the Rite pass? I mean the vaccine passport?
Yeah, actually, in restaurants, that's going to be that's more or less mandated by many of them. Right now, there are a lot of essential places that do require those passes. So, for example, if you're going into, I'm not sure if schools mandated, but any home care facility, for example, that's up to snuff is probably going to require that. So places that have vulnerable populations, we might be seeing that in the short term as well. So far it does look like you are going to need vaccines. Now, I know I know a lot of Catholics are divided on this question, and I'm not going to say how Catholics ought to respond, because I'll leave that up to the formation of their own conscience. I butchered that one a few too many times. And of course, they're speaking about it with their confessor and that sort of thing. As for myself, I did decide to get the vaccination, but in the same way, I am not judging anyone who doesn't. Please do not judge me.
Yeah, no, and we should probably change the topic. I don't want to get this video banned. We're treading in deep water here. All right, now,
don't worry, government. Justin Trudeau, we love vaccines. You're doing a great job. There we are, recovered.
Okay, John, who is Father Anthony Cekada?
So Father Anthony Cekada is probably one of the smartest Sedevacantist priests I've ever actually had the chance of interacting with in terms of his work. I started interacting with it a little after he died, so like very close to it. So I didn't get a chance to interact with him personally, although if I knew, I probably would have just taken the time to try to reach out, but that never happened. But Cekada was a very radical traditionalist. And by radical, I mean he was the kind of guy who wasn't like a sort of halfway person. He thought that the SSPX didn't go far enough. He actually joined a few priests in starting the Society of St. Pius V, which was a bit more hardline than the SSPX. Many within their ranks did not agree that the pontiffs after Pius XII were actual legitimate pontiffs. In fact, when you got to Pope Benedict the 16th and Pope Francis, they would actually regard them as not even real bishops, and hence, because of that, they would not actually sit on the papal throne with putting aside their quote unquote heresies. And Cekada not only was someone who was willing to call out the mainstream church, that is the one we are in communion with, but he felt that the SSPX didn't go far enough either. So he actually argued, for example, that the Novus Ordo, even though he thought it was reprehensible, he would say, look, if you're really committed to these popes being popes, and they went through all these legal rigmaroles to have the mass, the legally established mass, then yeah, they actually did follow the laws, they actually did follow the procedures, and you are obligated to respect and understand that the Novus Ordo is the Novus Ordo. And therefore you have a contradiction, because if the Novus Ordo is a mass that was harmful and yet propagated by the church legally, then you're basically throwing out Catholicism right then and there. And I agree with him. I think that is the case. But whereas I would say that the Novus Ordo is not spiritually harmful, and Father Cekada would say it is, that's where our disagreement is. We would both agree that the SSPX were in a position of having their cake and eating it too. So the man was actually very consistent. He was very methodical. He knew canon law fairly well, and he knew it well enough to argue that the SSPX was not in a place of good consistency. And that's actually going to come to the issue of the invalidity of the orders a little later. But for now, I do want to say that this is where he actually did a good job of challenging other traditionalists in this regard who did want to lay issues with the validity of the orders.
Yeah, no, that's interesting that you talk about calling out the inconsistency. I'm currently in contact with a top Catholic apologist. I'm not going to say his name, but if I said his name, everyone here would know who he is. And yeah, we're in the midst of talking about the inconsistencies in the trad movement and the certain approaches that are made. You know, you got Taylor Marshall, you got Michael Lofton, and there's truth in both camps, but I think there's a better way to go about this, although I do respect both of those people highly. So in 1968, I believe, there was a new priestly ordinal.
Yes, so there was a new ordinal, and it was launched after Vatican II, and this ordinal had a new form, and it also had a new rite altogether. And the old form was exchanged for a new form. And in the new form, basically you had this consecration. And now pour forth on this chosen one that power which is from you, the governing spirit, whom you gave to your beloved Son, Jesus Christ, whom he gave to his holy apostles, who founded the church in every place as your sanctuary, unto the glory and unending praise of your name. End quote. So this is the new Episcopal consecration. And with this,
okay, and we're going to be talking both about the Episcopal consecration and priestly ordination, right?
Right, and okay. Yeah, so the priestly ordination is going to come a bit later, but the Episcopal consecration is going to be the main one we need to deal with now. And you could find it in Pope Paul VI's new Rite for Sacred Ordination, and it was an encyclical released in 1968. So that's where you could find the form itself contained. And what's really interesting about this form is if you look at what is required for ordination, with any new form, you need two things. One, you need reference to the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost. And the second is you're going to need a reference to the office or the main power of the office. And if this is the case, then if you're going to need a reference to both, one seems to be missing. So here it is. We'll read it again very slowly, and we'll check out what Cekada's point is. He says, no, the Episcopal form says, and now pour forth on this chosen one that power which is from you, the governing Spirit, whom you gave to your beloved Son, Jesus Christ, whom he gave to his holy apostles, who founded the church in every place as your sanctuary, unto the glory and unending praise of your name. So that's the full form. Now, Alan, does it say the episcopate or the bishopric or office of bishop or anything like that in the form?
It's not apparent.
Exactly, it's not. Now, but does it mention the Holy Spirit at all?
Yes.
Yes, that would be the governing Spirit, right?
Yep.
Yeah, even Father Cekada would say as much. He said, judging by the form and the fact that Spirit is capitalized, that it is the Holy Spirit who is referenced. Now, it does mention a power that's given. Pour forth on this chosen one that power which is from you. So the two words, that power, that, like, you're given a power in any consecration. So that power, how do we get it to the episcopate? Well, at least my thesis is, whom he gave to the apostles who founded the church in every place as your sanctuary, unto the glory and unending praise of your name. So it's that part that signifies that out of all the orders, it seems like the order is one of the episcopate. And that's basically going to be the contention I'm going to bring to his argument. He's going to say, because it doesn't mention the episcopate in any explicit way, therefore we're going to have to say that it's considered null, or it's power. Now, this is so we're just going to go into a few of the ways in which it's defended, at least by the SSPX, and then I'll show why I think Cekada is right that they are inconsistent, but it's not apparent how they're inconsistent. So there is actually an apologist for the SSPX. His name is Father Paris Marie, and he claims that that the latter part, which says,
just pause for a second. Is this priest? Is he a contemporary, or
he's a contemporary of Cekada's? Yes.
Is he alive now, or?
I haven't checked to see if he is still alive, but if you read on the SSPX website, he's the one who they published one of his articles defending the Novus Ordo Episcopal consecrations, and of course Father Cekada in another response to him, still null, still void response to it. So Father Paris-Marie claims that the phrase power given to the apostles to establish churches necessarily implies that of ordaining priests. And Father Cekada says that's false for two reasons. He says, one, the apostles founded churches only because they enjoyed an extraordinary jurisdiction to do so. The theologian Dorsch says specifically that this power is not communicated to bishops. Not all those functions proper to the apostles are also proper to bishops. For example, to establish new churches. And B, to establish churches, dioceses, in modern terminology, is an exercise of the power of jurisdiction, not one of orders, such as ordaining priests. This jurisdictional power is proper to the Roman pontiff alone. So those would be his objections to this line of reasoning. And the reason why I would say that Father Paris-Marie is inconsistent is because there's a reason why this change happened, and that was actually to further cement developments of doctrine concerning the episcopate founded in which famous council in the 20th century? 21st century? No, 20th century? 2000s. Wait, 1990. You know what I mean. It was in the 60s. Let's leave it at that and forget about my bumbling.
The favorite council of every SXPXer out there.
Yep. The Second Vatican Council. So if you read the Second Vatican Council, one of the things that they actually settled on, a very important question, which is whether or not the episcopate is a distinct order from that of the presbyterate. So you had guys like Thomas Aquinas, and you had guys like Jerome, who would not have said that the episcopacy is a sacramental order. That is, it's not that is, when a priest becomes a bishop, he doesn't get a new sacramental power, but rather he just gets some new powers of extension. So he can ordain priests, for example, and other members, and he becomes the ordinary minister of certain sacraments. So he gets those sorts of powers, but he doesn't get any sacramental power. And in fact, one of the reasons why Thomas Aquinas didn't think that one was validly ordained a bishop unless they were ordained a priest first is because it wasn't an order at all. So if anyone is interested in that, you could read the Summa. But since Vatican II, that is not going to be a position you can take. The Second Vatican Council ruled that it is in fact a sacramental order. It is distinct, and when somebody is ordained, they're actually given certain sacramental functions which are ready to act, because when you are ordained a bishop, not only do you get those powers of the order, but in addition to like the ones we outlined earlier about ordaining priests, but you also get a function that's ready to act when you are under the Pope. So every bishop, for example, enjoys a right to be at an ecumenical council. And that's explained by the fact that they want to participate in the council itself. They're there, they're ready to join their voice with that of the Pope. And basically, they're like an extension of papal power. So an ecumenical council is still actually an act of papal supremacy. It's just an act that is done through the body of the bishops rather than separately from the bishops. So there's the extraordinary use and the ordinary use. Ecumenical councils are considered ordinary, whereas the Pope's power is considered more of an extraordinary use. And
a good person to learn more about this from is Elijah Yassi, who I've had on this channel, and he did a ton of stuff on his channel. He had a video a couple days ago, even that I'm only like half done, but yeah, no, it's a good guide to use. But yeah, continue.
So if you read the document Lumen Gentium, it outlines this fairly clearly. Among those various ministries which, according to tradition, were exercised in the church from the earliest time, the chief place belongs to the office of those who, appointed by the episcopate by a succession running from the beginning, are passers on of the apostolic seed. Therefore, the Sacred Council teaches. So notice here the words, this Sacred Council teaches. It's by using these words, it's basically saying, these words are saying that the council is teaching. It's not an anathema, but it is basically developing doctrine and binding us to it. So it says, therefore, this Sacred Council teaches, bishops by divine institution have succeeded to the place of the apostles as shepherds of the church. So the episcopate is established by divine institution, and he who hears them hears Christ, and he who rejects them rejects Christ and him who sent Christ. And it also says in another place, the order of bishops, which succeeds to the college of apostles and gives this apostolic body continued existence, is also the subject of supreme and full power over the universal church, provided we understand this body together with its head, the Roman pontiff, and never without it. And the appendix also says, a person becomes a member of the college of the apostles by virtue of episcopal consecration, and by hierarchical communion with the head of the college with its members. In this consecration, a person is given an ontologic participation in the sacred functions. Now, it says here, again in another place, one is constituted a member of the episcopal body in virtue of sacramental consecration and hierarchical communion with the head and members of the body. So here it's just fairly obvious. This is sacramental. It's something which is its own order. It gives an ontologic participation, and it is something which it does by its very essence. So let's go. So if we go back to the Episcopal form, whom he gave to the holy apostles who founded the church in every place as your sanctuary unto the glory and unending praise of your name. Notice here, it speaks of the church. It doesn't speak of churches or particular jurisdictions. It speaks of the church.
That's
And
a good
it
point.
says, yeah, and it says, in every place as your sanctuary, unto the glory and unending praise of your name. So it's not just implicit, as Father Pierre Marie states. It's very explicit, and it's not in terms of the powers of jurisdiction, because Father Pierre Marie is under the assumption that we're working with a Vatican I theology, one which is far more open to specific views on what the episcopate is, whereas Vatican II pretty much closed a lot of these debates. And notice the apostles themselves don't find the church in every place as his sanctuary unto the unending praise of God's name, because there are places that the apostles never went to. Not only that, but it says, but it's supposed to be like throughout time as well. So it's rather obvious that it's referring to the episcopal office, not in implicit words, but explicit words referencing the office in light of Vatican II's magisterial teachings and pronunciations. And with that in mind, if this is true, if Vatican II is a legitimate council, which I think both you and I would say, then Father Cekada, his issue isn't that he's presenting a bad faith argument. I think it's a really good faith argument. I just don't think it's a good argument that because it begs the question against the mainstream church. It's a good argument if you're using it against the SSPX or people who are in doubt of Vatican II's legitimacy. But if you affirm it, then you basically have to affirm that our priests and, well, at least our bishops are legitimate bishops. Because this is explicitly what Lumen Gentium is saying. And even Pope Paul VI, St. Pope Paul VI actually states that the reason why we should look to these orders in light of Vatican II is specifically because of the fact that it's formed in light of its theology. So these are explicit; it's not implicit. These are in reference to a text which the Bishop of Rome demands we read them through. So anyone who is referencing this form is signifying something as understood by the church, not up to every individual reader, but the church itself. This is the official reading of it. This is how we are to read it in light of the documents, and there's just no other way around it. If you want to say that Vatican II is illegitimate, hence you're wrong about episcopal ordinations, then that's its own argument. But to say that it's just because it's just not explicit already is to beg the question, at least against someone who affirms the Second Vatican Council.
So, question for you, John.
Sure.
If Vatican II gives us the precise theology, a question that a traditionalist or even a set of Contas would ask is that theology in Vatican II, does it have a pedigree in like the scholastics, some church fathers, some other theologians prior to Vatican II and prior to the death of Pope Pius XII?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So if you want to look at some theological manuals about the nature of the episcopate, there was always constant debate about its precise nature. So there was, if you look at Ligori, he speaks about, I'm not sure if it is Ligori's position, but I'm reading this like off a third-hand source. His name is John Daly. He was a sedevacantist who was even very critical of Michael Davies, like super critical of him. He wrote an entire book calling out Davies for everything from his theological errors to just blatantly lying. And some of the criticisms are actually pretty scathing and accurate. But one which I found particularly interesting is there were actual people who said that Archbishop Lefebvre was not a legitimate bishop because he was ordained a priest by a Freemason who was
By Cardinal Lienert.
Yep, exactly. And because
I don't know if he was a cardinal at the time of.
He was a bishop at the very least.
Yeah, and I know in Vatican II they squared off against each other quite a bit.
Yep. So one of the interesting things about it is if he was really a Freemason, and there is an argument that he was withholding intention, um, and not really providing a proper intention, then he's not a legitimate priest. And if you're not a legitimate priest, you can't be a legitimate bishop. And there was actually open debate about the subject. And the reason why it's actually very important is there were people who actually, a minority of moral theologians, said that he would still be a legitimate bishop even if he wasn't a priest, because some people took the position that since all the higher orders contain the lower orders, and when you ordain somebody to the episcopate, even if they weren't a bishop, they would still be a bishop because the lower orders are contained in it. Just like if someone was ordained a priest without first being a deacon, they would still be a priest, or someone wasn't ordained to the minor orders before going to the major orders. Now, that was a position some people took, but not all. Thomas Aquinas, as I said earlier, did not take that position. But even those who did hold that the episcopate was a separate order, some of them still argued that even if it is a separate order, that Christ would have still required the candidate be a priest anyway for some other reason. And that's actually a position I defended in a recent debate with an Anglican apologist who wants to say that old Catholic bishops made Anglican laymen, even on our theology, legitimate bishops, and they would have just made legitimate priests. But my argument was, it seems like Christ ordained the apostles priests and then made them apostles, like ordained them bishops for a reason sometime after it. And if that's because that's what we read in Acts 1 with the ordination of Matthias. But if that's the case, then it would definitely seem to me that whether you're saying it's a separate order or the same order, you could always still make that point. But even Ligori was documenting that you had people who took all these different sides, and this was back in his time before Vatican I. So it's not like this debate wasn't present in the older church, but doctrine develops. Like the church settles these disputes for a reason, just like we settled the dispute concerning the Assumption of Mary. And in fact, the major source of this position was on the episcopate and the presbyterate was ressourcement. It was actually looking at the patristics. So if you look at Hippolytus, for example, which is actually where we drew a lot of the sources for the ordination.
The new Mass as well, right? The canon of the Mass.
Yeah, exactly. This is actually where we ourselves get this sort of theology. And not only in Hippolytus, but if you look at some of the earliest ordinals, they always kind of made reference to the relation of the episcopate and the presbyterate as being similar to Moses ordaining his elders. Now, this isn't to say that they're one for one, but the point is you had this relationship already in the early church. It would seem like there's a sharp distinction between Moses' prophetic ministry and that of his elders, but they were still considered to be prophets in a delegated sense. It seems to me that this is what Lumen Gentium is drawing on. You could actually look at the footnotes where Lumen Gentium's sources are coming from, whether it's the ancient church or whether it's in scripture. But the point is, it has the power to decide these things. The scholastics, I would say, would probably not wanted to go into this position because Thomas didn't believe that they were distinct. He thought that the episcopate was not a separate order entirely from the presbyteral order. He just thought it was just something that was non-sacramental, but it added additional powers. So Thomas would have probably disagreed with it. Some of the scholastics might have disagreed with it. But at the time of development, and you could read it in the New Advent or Old Catholic Encyclopedia, more people were swayed to the position that it was sacramental. And, Vatican II is just basically continuing on that projection.
Yeah, and just because something is defined late doesn't, I'm trying to make the point that just because something's not defined by a certain time, it doesn't mean that it was not believed prior. For example,
Yeah.
like for example, 1215 at the Fourth Lateran Council was where they declared transubstantiation a doctrine, like a dogma of the faith. But like in the patristic era, there is more than enough evidence to prove it. It's not like some monk in the 1100s in France is like, "Hey guys, I've been reading some Aristotle and I got this crazy idea." You know, and it's like, no, that didn't happen. You know,
Right.
this stuff was debated centuries before, and eventually the church feels that eventually it will say, look, it's they've debated this in the past, and over time a lot of competing positions have fallen away. I guess this is what God gave us. It's set in stone.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And in fact, this is the Old Catholic Encyclopedia article or section of the article I was thinking of. With regards to the episcopate, the Council of Trent defines that a bishop belongs to the divinely instituted hierarchy, that they are superior to priests, and that they have the power of confirming and ordaining which is proper to them. The superiority of bishops is abundantly attested in tradition, and we have seen above that the distinction between priest and bishop is of apostolic origin. Most of the older scholastics were of the opinion that the episcopate is not a sacrament. This opinion finds able defenders now. Example, Billet in De Sacramentis, section 2 or volume 2. Though the majority of theologians hold it is certain that a bishop's ordination is a sacrament. So this would be the position that a lot of the scholastics held. But if you go back to the patristics, it seems like the earlier view, at least according to the trajectory of most theologians, was heading towards the view that it is sacramental. It is something that's in addition to.
Who is the like in church history? Who's the greatest opponent of that view?
Let's see. I haven't researched that view myself, so I couldn't
that you know of.
Okay. Yeah,
If you don't know, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really research it. If I had to start looking for a defender because I just accept the council for what it says, I'm like, okay, that's the position, fine. If I had to first look at an able-bodied defender, I'd probably search someone like Bellarmine, because chances are he would have squared off against Calvin, who held to a very presbyteral view or focus. Yeah. So that would probably be my first thought or go-to, but yeah, I really couldn't say offhand.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm curious, in terms of, this is more of a church history question, but
right.
Do we have ordinals going back pre-Trent?
Oh, we have a ton of ordinals going back pre-Trent.
Latin Rite?
Yep. We have a Roman Rite. We have Gaelic Rite. We do have quite a few of those.
Okay. Is there any from the first millennium?
Not that I can think of off the top of my
head. It's kind of hard pre-printing press, because
that.
Because as soon as they update an ordinal, it's not like they're going to copy the old one anymore.
Right.
So
also, we have to ask ourselves: is it translated yet? Because that's also a thing.
Yeah,
we do have limits in the English language. So we do have Hippolytus. You could access that on the web right now. Now, what's interesting is Father Cekada. He actually devotes a lot of good time in his article about the ordinal being null and void. He calls it absolutely null and utterly void in reference to Pope Leo's encyclical Apostolica Curiae. What's really interesting about it is
you wouldn't know anything about that, would you?
Oh, I know a ton about that one, but what's really interesting about the ordinal is about that piece by Cekada is he spends a lot of time attacking Hippolytus, and he uses a bunch of very critical scholarly sources who say, yeah, it was probably an interpolation. It's probably not even from the original Hippolytus. It's probably a later reconstruction. So he's very skeptical of the document itself. But like I'll grant him the whole shebang. Like, let's be very critical of it. I'm even willing to grant it's a forgery, just for the sake of argument. What matters is not whether or not the document is a forgery. What matters is, did the council rule a specific way? Was the council valid? And if it is valid, then we have to take it for what it is. If it's not, then you have to make the argument. So I don't really concern myself too much with the historical component. I just care about showing that it meets the minimum criteria, and I'm not willing to relinquish Vatican II to do it. I think if you do, then you're in hot water, and you have to try your best as a SSPX style trad of making the argument.
So, do you think these arguments that Cekada puts forward, that the documents from Hippolytus is a forgery? Where do you think that? Do you think they're good arguments, or so arguments? They're bad arguments?
Actually, it's kind of interesting that you say that. I've been looking at some. So I was actually doing a bit of research on that. Like, maybe I could take the historical side of it, but later there was quite a bit of, at least in some modern liturgists, a lot of them are more skeptical of it. I'm trying to remember. There was one book on the liturgy by an Anglican theologian who was fairly critical of Dix and his use of Hippolytus. I'm not sure I would want to just defend it on Hippolytus alone myself. Then again, I'm not the church history guy. That's not my forte of specialty. I'd much rather just take what the council says and go from there. But I think if you are interested in church history, as you are, I think you'd probably do a much better job of finding the pros and cons of the argument. It's just something I gave up on because I just found it a bit too difficult and out of my wheelhouse.
Is this document quoted often from, like a Saint Hippolytus is from the year about 200, right? Is when he thrives. He dies in, I think, 217. I could be wrong on that. Don't quote me. But is the document quoted later on by theologians to prove X, Y, or Z? Or is that something you don't know either?
Well, I mean, it was considered a part of the ressourcement. It was a document that was founded a lot later. But if you look at a lot of the people who were obsessed with ressourcement and Vatican II and that sort of thing, it was pretty much the basis of it that they were working off of. So I'm not sure what would be earlier than that. And yeah.
Oh, okay. Now, do you know much about the ordinations for the other rites, like the Greek rite, the Coptic rite, that are used in the Catholic Church?
Yes, I do. Although that's something I discovered less in the Cekada affair and more debating Anglicans.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it speaks to here. So Cekada would often cite these other ordinals and say, see, they have it. And like a lot of it you could just find by looking at the polemics between Catholic and Anglicans. Now, a lot of Anglicans misunderstood Pope Leo, and they thought, oh, he requires reference to the office, their prime power, and the Holy Spirit. And look at all these ordinals that fail. And then they were like, oh, wait. Then people pointed out, oh, no, that's an or, not an and. So
it only needs one, right? You said that in your debate with Father James, that I remember. It was a great debate, by the way. I totally endorse his debate with Father James. He did, I think, on Boxing Day of last year. It's a great debate. We got a question from Patty McGill. Was the Celtic rite ancient? I believe it was, and that it might prove that a pope can abolish a rite since the Pope abolished the Celtic rite. I assume you mean the Celtic rite when you say Gaelic. All right.
Yeah, so the Pope can abolish a rite. In fact, even the, I believe it was the old canon law, 1917, 1918. I think if the Pope just wanted to say, yeah, no more traditional Latin Mass, it's gone, by law, he could do so. Now, whether he should or not is a totally different question. I side with, no, stop. Why are you doing this? It's crazy pants. Like that's my position. He can, he just shouldn't. But yeah, that is part of the power of the Pope.
Do you see the debate on this between Tim Gordon and Timothy Flanders, the two Tim?
Tim and Tim. No, I haven't.
Tim squared, yeah. No, yeah, like that's a debate I've been meaning to watch. Like those two are probably, if I were to make my top 2 or top 3 or 4 Catholic apologists, those two would be in there. I love them both. They're just absolutely great gifts to the church, and I'm glad that they're taking on this stuff. Yeah, no, I've been talking with them a lot. More questions, guys. Have you got any more questions? Thanks, Alan Rule. By the way, that is how my name is pronounced. Rule, like rule of thumb, you know. That's how my name is pronounced. See, Sam Shamoon calls me Alan Ruhel. And I'm like, okay, you know, I'll go along with that. I'm not that strict if you mispronounce it, but if you want to know, it's pronounced rule, like rule of thumb. I've told people my last name, they're like, oh, is it French? Roulle. It's well, no, it's German. It's Volga German. It was a great debate. I got caught up in the chat and have to rewatch it. Okay, no, that's true. I really do got to rewatch. I think I watched like 20 minutes of it, but it's long, so it's quite the debate. And yeah, they're questions the trad movement needs to answer. I don't know if you identify as a trad, John.
I do not know. I at some point, I think for quite a bit of time, I called myself a normie Catholic just to emphasize that, yeah, I'm pretty mainstream in milquetoast. I'm a trad only in the sense of I love the traditional Latin Mass. It's awesome and it should be continued. And it's crazy pants that anyone would try to suppress it or get rid of it. And frankly, I think that by doing this, you're just generating a lot more infighting than not. I just don't think it's prudential. But I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say anything like the Novus Ordo is deficient or has any inherent defects or something like that. I think if you're just going to make the claim that we should have the traditional Latin Mass, then you should make a claim based on the fact that there is just something about it we really need in the modern era, and I think that isn't a hard bar to climb. I think you can make it.
So do you oh man, I totally lost my question. It was based on something that you said. There's a question here by Patty Miguel. How old was the Celtic Rite when abolished, and do we know what it was like?
I couldn't really speak to that. I haven't studied Celtic history and the church and its position on the Celtic Rite. As far as I know, it had suppressed certain Celtic traditions. Like the one I can think of is the tonsure. Like in the East, you would tonsure somebody by just cutting their hair off completely, just full bald. In the Roman Rite, you would do this by buzzing like the circle right here, and on the outside, you'd still keep your hair. And so it was like a crown. But the Celtics actually buzzed a triangle in their hair, and that was abolished. So there were some specific practices that were abolished. I'm not sure about much of the history surrounding it, so I wouldn't really want to speak to that.
Yo, Elijah, what's up? Nice having you back, man. We're talking about a very important topic, and we're going to go to our buddy Settler's Lament. Question: is everyone here, chat included, subscribed to the world-famous Settler's Lament? Well, I can't speak for anyone else, but I know I am.
I know I am.
There you go. I guess to all the people in the chat and anyone who watches this, I highly recommend watching Settler's Lament, and not just because he's had me on before. I mean, that's good enough, but still, no, his content is top notch. Yeah, no, we did our good Canada Day special. That was a great one. It was on there, a few on there. Okay. Patty McGilligan, what was the council or event where the Pope canceled all rites not older than 200 years? And was the Celtic rite one of them? Was that Trent? I actually know the answer to the first one, but
it was Trent. The Pope decided to suppress. Pope Pius V decided to suppress all rites that were not older than 200 years, and that was to create more uniformity in the church, which was a good thing at the time because Protestants were not the most uniform a bunch, and it's a good thing to contrast the two. Pope Pius V did do this in his encyclical afterwards, where it's that famous encyclical, the ones trad cite about Quo Primum, yeah.
Yes, Settler's Lament. I would, I'd be honored. In fact, today I had some extra cash come my way for a certain reason. The first thing I did was go and spend it on Crusade primary sources. I'm a big geek, but a geek who likes his primary sources. So,
right.
Yeah, just send me a DM. I'll come on whenever.
By the way, I managed to find some of the points Father Cekada raised against Hippolytus, or Hippolytus, as you more correctly pronounced it.
Well, you got to make sure not to put the accent on the wrong syllable,
Sure. Love it. So basically, Father Cekada questioned it on like 5 fronts. He said identity of the author was a huge issue, and he cites the Jesuit expert Jean-Michel Hassens, and he basically said that it was anonymous and it could have been a variety of sources. He basically questioned the origin. He said, where did the apostolic tradition come from? Some say Rome, others say Alexandria, more conjecture. He questioned the age. How old is it? Usually dated around 215, but the section dealing with ordination may have been retouched by the 4th century in order to bring it in line with current doctrines and practices. Note, retouched. More scholarly conjecture is needed to tell us which parts of the document were retouched. He questions the manuscript authority. He says, how much confidence can we put in the originals? Well, we don't even have them. But that's so cheap because we don't even have the biblical manuscripts with us right now. But we trust the later ones that we have. So I didn't really think that the manuscript authority appeal was that, or skepticism was that great. And the 5th one was liturgical use. Does the text accurately reflect its actual use? It is not easy to distinguish what represents real usage from ideal, says Dom Botte in 1963. The prayers of the apostolic tradition were given as models and not fixed formulas. So basically his other position was we don't even know if it was used to ordain anyone, and it was just an ideal. So those were the forms of criticism he came to, but yeah, I
think that's kind of weak, actually.
Yeah, I think the manuscript authority was pretty bad. As to the ideal, like if it's an ideal, then it at the very least gives you a good guideline.
It's like this kind of skepticism is the same kind of skepticism that says Paul didn't write half of the epistles in the New Testament that are ascribed to him. Of course, he'll accept it for one thing, but except, like, for example, it's like when Protestants cling to liberal Catholic scholars that say there was no Bishop of Rome till the mid-2nd century and all that stuff like that. These same people think that, again, that St. Paul didn't write half his letters, that the Gospel of John there's no authentic sayings in the Gospel of John, and in the Synoptics, most of the sayings are BS as well. And like, it's this kind of ultra skepticism, and like, if you want to be selective, consistent and go all the way. Don't try to be conservative in one way and don't try to be conservative one way and ultra skepticism in another way. Not cool. Be consistent. And James White, I think he's wrong on a lot of things, but he is right when they say inconsistency is a sign of a failed argument. All right, more from Patty. You referred to the Gaelic Rite. What is the Gaelic Rite? And then Elijah answered, the rite used in Celtic lands, Ireland, etc. You got Ivan Spaziano. Am I pronouncing that right? Obviously, the Tridentine rite was similar to the ancient Roman one, or it also was evolved through history, ?
Yeah, so that's actually pretty interesting. So one thing to keep in mind, if you look at the original quote unquote Roman Rite, the one that we're very much acquainted with, it would not have been the original one used in Rome. That would have been in Greek, and it would have been more Oriental in nature. The one that we have now is, I think, like a 3rd or 4th century departure, if the New Advent article I'm recalling is correct. Don't swear to what I said as gospel, but it seems that there's good reason to believe that it was not something in the 1st century. That's highly doubtful. But at the very least, don't think that what we have from Trent is just like it's not. The questioner isn't saying it's a carbon copy of what would have happened in the 1st century, but suffice it to say, I don't think that what we want to claim is that it is something which is apostolic in nature. Like the apostles literally used something similar to what we had in Trent. I don't think that you would want to make that argument.
Okay. Do we know what that rite was like? I take it she's talking about the Gaelic rite again.
Oh, I think Patty might just be speaking to Elijah at this point.
Okay, this is a good question about from Elijah. Pope Saint, well, it's a statement really.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to comment on this. Pope Saint Gregory the Great basically made the Roman rite. I don't think that's true. I think he had influence on it, no doubt, but that certainly goes back before him. Like it goes back to like Pope Victor in the 2nd century. There's certainly a lot of stuff there, and even in the 4th century, there like it's starting to look very distinct. That's based off the reading I've done. Have you?
Yeah. So just something to keep in mind: what is considered "quote unquote" the Roman Rite. That is like how much of it needs to be preserved for it to literally be the Roman Rite. So even Pope Paul VI, when he was talking, when he had people requesting that he keep the Tridentine Rite and the Roman Rite alive, he said, "Wait, what are you talking about? The Roman Rite is alive in Eucharistic prayer number 1. Like you could still do that and retain most of it." Now, there's still some debate about how much it has been kept or lost where it constitutes that Roman Rite, but the fact of the matter is how much of it is preserved is still an open question. So if at any point we actually had things that were added to it that one could take away, then you could still consider it the Roman Rite. But that's obviously an open question that I don't think I can fully capture in this one interview. I haven't done that much study on it.
Yeah, no, and there's like I know Pope Benedict has published quite a bit on the liturgy, and like it's a topic that I've not delved into. But like it's certainly there's a lot of history, and like now in 2021 the Roman Rite of the Catholic Church is very, or Latin Rite is like very standardized. If you go back to the year 1000 or something, you'd have a rite in Rome, you'd have a rite in Milan, you have a rite in Spain, a rite elsewhere, the Celtic rite, and so yeah, and I don't know, I kind of wish we had that still, but the church chose to standardize the whole Latin rite, which is, they made a choice, and it's still the Mass. I love the Mass. All right, do you have any recommended reading for our audience on this topic? You want to tackle Father Cekada?
Right. So I think if you want some good introductory material, you should check out my blog piece on the validity of the new Episcopal rites refuting Father Cekada. And there I pretty much cite all my sources, dot all my P's and Q's, give my reading from Lumen Gentium. I'd say that one thing you ought to read is Lumen Gentium itself. You could see the parts that make it fairly clear of what's said. You could also find some of the moral theologians I consulted about the requisites, namely that it has to signify the order in some way, and it has to either through the office or the power, which I said it does because it cites a document specifically about defining it. Then, of course, and the Holy Spirit, and it has to be signified in a way that's understood by the church itself. And there you can basically find a good introduction to it, and you could also find all the links and all the citations there as well. The trick to finding good resources is follow the citations wherever they lead, and you pretty much have a good understanding of the discussion. So I'd say start there, and you could find all the ancillary texts as well. You could read Father Cekada's Still Null, Still Void, and Absolutely Null and Utterly Void for the arguments themselves. He cites Merkelbach and the Latin. I had a friend who was nice enough to translate that for me. And you could also read Pope Pius XII, Sacramentum Ordinis on the sacraments. So that would be the earlier form, the original one. You could also read Pope Paul VI on his encyclical as well. Again, it's in the footnotes. You could read for a more traditionalist approach. So if you don't like the whole Vatican II approach and you're an SSPX sort of guy, but you're despairing right now because you don't want to have to defend Vatican II, you know what? I'm very gracious. All is not lost. If you read True Pope, False Pope, that is a more traditional source.
That book is a brick. Whew.
It is, but they have a whole section devoted to it, and they defend it from their own traditionalist angle. Basically, so the form that I read isn't the full form. There's actually an extended form as well, and it actually mentions things like appointing priests and princes to the sanctuary, and of course that seems to imply ordination right then and there. So that's not really too huge an issue. Father Cekada says, well, that's not where Pope Paul VI defines the form, but really the form is wherever there are the words and the matter. So that's
just creating an impossible standard,
Yeah,
it's kind of like, where did the early church use the word transubstantiation? Well, they didn't, but it's obvious they're talking about the Eucharist and the real presence and the priest's words doing the question from Ivan. Thanks, sir. You're Italian. It's good. I've made that question because the diocese where I live is closest to Rome, and it's very ancient, 3rd century. Oh, well, thank you. I actually used to have an Italian roommate, Piero. Yeah, he's a good guy. Not the most religious Catholic in the world, but he'd pray before meals. He identified as Catholic, but kind of wish he went to church more. I don't think he went to church in the whole era. He was my roommate. But okay, I'll tell you what, Ivan. If you're on Twitter, send me a DM. I would not mind talking to you about a few things. Just interesting talking to Italian Catholics. What I meant is to say that Pope St. Gregory reformed the Roman Rite. Well, that is true, and he did a lot of reforms, like church government reforms, monastic reforms, like a lot of reforms happened, and like around that time, things were not looking too good in the Western Church after the Roman Emperor fell. Roman Empire fell in the West. Was not good, and he was like a hero when the West needed a hero. Huge, amazing man. No, that's Pope Leo the Great.
I see.
Yeah,
all these greats.
Yeah, the great popes. All right. Also, John Fisher 2.0's work against Anglican orders is good. Yeah, it's very impressive stuff.
Thank you.
It's very impressive. I'm very impressed with the stuff he's done. Mind you, I got to concede, I was also impressed with Father James's arguments. That's the Anglican he debated.
To be fair, he had an advantage over me that I didn't. He actually spent, I think, 6 months studying this topic specifically for it was either a paper or it was actually, I think, a master's thesis or something. If not, he actually did it as a part of his Anglican studies. So he was research. So he actually had more, I wouldn't say time, but he studied it in a more academic setting, whereas I had to study it just by myself. But to be fair, I think there were a few things that were hard to nail down. I think if you're going to debate this with Anglicans, then it's much easier to argue against them using the form rather than the intent, because that's a little harder to prove. And it's easier to show that the form is wrong because the 1551 form is just really hard to defend on any front. At best, they just resort to private interpretations of scripture, which is, well, that's how Jesus ordained the apostles, not to the priesthood, though, not even to the bishopric. And not only that, but they seem to just completely ignore all custom, which is, I think, how you should argue with Anglicans. But if they're going to be, we have the historical customs of the church, just show them they don't through the ordinals.
Yeah, no, that's good that you study those ordinals. And the book True or False Pope is actually a good book, not just on this, but on a lot of things to do with traditional. It's a good polemic against the Sedevacantist. I know they've responded to some parts of it, but I think overall it's still a very solid book. Have you got any projects on the go now, John?
Yeah, so right now, me and Apologia Anglicana, formerly known as Disputed Questions on YouTube, his name is Christian. His name is Christian. Great guy. He has a blog as well. He's also highly influenced by Cardinal John Henry Newman, as am I. We've been having a back and forth debate on Anglican orders. I opened up with the salvo, just the traditional arguments against Anglican orders from intent and form. And then he responded in he actually was willing to grant apostolic curiae, which I found very nice. But he wanted to say that even if we were to grant it, there's a new ordinal form that Pope Leo didn't speak of. And he also said that because you had old Catholic bishops who didn't come there with the preconceived Anglican intent, and they would have probably just read the office in there as office as they would have understood it, because there's some room for doubt about whether or not they would have been bishops, or they would have actually been validly ordaining. I think, although in my response video I just say, well, the church pretty much agrees, not with dogmatically or doctrinally, but there's good unanimity to believe that it would be invalid if the person wasn't a priest first, in addition to the fact that we could still make some pretty good arguments against intent, because the ordinals were constructed in an Anglican context, which is still arguably anti-sacerdotal. So I just didn't touch on the second part, but I did want to emphasize that, yeah, I don't think they would have been valid anyway.
So that's interesting, though, because if he's granting apostolic curiae, but it only got repaired with the bishops from the old Catholics, technically then he thinks that the Anglican Church went 200 or 300 years with no bishops then, right?
Well, I mean, that would be his commitment if he assumed this position was true. I'm not sure he is, though. I think he's only granting it in arguendo and saying, even if it was true, we'd still have valid Anglican orders. But I want to say, okay, no, that's not good enough, because I could still make these other arguments. But to be fair, if I had a Catholic with me and they would tell me, oh, I think because of the old Catholic bishops, because they came in, they ordained with Catholic intent, and they would have read the form in the utmost Catholic way, that there's good reason to believe that they are validly ordained bishops. If someone as a Catholic was to give that to me, I would say that they were wrong, but I couldn't find room to excommunicate them or to say that they're denying Catholic doctrine, because apostolic curiae only spoke to the Anglican bishops up till that point, not afterwards. So they wouldn't be violating anything in terms of church infallibility, but I don't think there's good room to believe in that. And I think that at the very least, any Catholic with their head on straight should demand that it is conditionally ordained, as opposed to just admitting them without preordination. Yeah.
So keep in mind, on a related topic, speaking of Anglicans, the Catholic priest, the Catholic Church got an Anglican bishop today.
Yep. Now, what's funny is I actually read his Wikipedia. Apparently, he was one. Apparently, he ordained one of the first archdeacon female in the Anglican Church. So I'm pretty sure he'd have to reform his views on that if he's becoming Catholic. But I think, and I'm going to be very gracious when I say this, I think he probably did change his mind when he learned that, oh wow, this wasn't a total slippery slope argument. This is literally what's happening. So I I really do hope he does regret that position. But yeah, the guy is actually he I the guy is actually really smart. He is really good when it comes to Christian Islamic dialogue. He is part of the more conservative voice of the Anglican Church. He even spoke out against atheists at various points. Um, he's pro-life, against abortion, against euthanasia, and he did it in a very liberal apparatus. It's not like in the Catholic Church
Yeah.
where liberals are there, but they're very hush hush and try to use doublespeak. They're just very open about it. So I think that there is a lot of good coming from his conversion, and I hope this is just going to lead to more better spiritual fruit.
We've got a few Anglican bishops across the Tiber this year.
Yeah, it's great. Now, I'm trying not to smile too much because we have Anglican friends, but
Hi, guys.
Hi guys. Here's the thing. I'm not going to say that we're right and you're wrong because your bishops are coming over, but I will say this much. I think there's a Cardinal Edward Manning. One of the reasons he left the Anglican Church was because he was a member of the Church of England. Now, the Church of England isn't the whole of the Anglican Church, but it is the Anglican Church that is the official church of England. And one of the reasons he left is because he had to conclude it was a creature of Parliament. And he did it because a privy council said, yeah, we know this cleric rejects baptismal regeneration, but we're going to make him a cleric anyway. And at that point, he was like, okay, central tenet, Anglican Church, we're just ignoring that. And you're just
Caesaropapism.
Caesaropapism. And he's like, yeah, I'm crossing the Tiber.
Well,
now,
yeah, sorry.
Oh, to be fair to our Anglican friends, they're part of the continuing Anglican movement. It's not like the Church of England. It's a regular church. It's run by bishops who have local councils. And I don't think it's going to have those same weaknesses because they're not under a king or a monarch to guarantee it. They are just under the rule of bishops themselves, which is good because you're not going to get that liberalism. But there's going to be another issue, which is the legitimacy of the bishop, because who has the right to rule? You're either going to decide it by a monarch, and we saw how badly that went with the Church of England and with the Eastern Orthodox churches, because you don't have a Byzantine emperor anymore. You're ruled by, at least in the Byzantine, at least currently in Constantinople, the Muslims, or you have a bishop who is the head of bishops, in which case you do have an answer for legitimate ruling.
Well, and like I think that's interesting. I just read. I bought this for its Fourth Crusade quality. I'm actually going to do a book review probably on this. The Chronicles of Nicetas Cognatus, that goes from 118. That's when Alexius Comnenus dies. That's the guy who asked the Pope for the Crusades. Till 1207, and in those, that's a Byzantine account of 3 crusades. That's very crucial. I got it mainly for the Fourth Crusade, but all the other stuff is good. But it's got a lot of other stuff that's going on in the Byzantine Emperor, and essentially, the emperor was not in charge. Was in charge of the church. It was a layman running the show. He essentially made decrees like go. I don't have time to explain it all here, but go Manuel Comnenus, who ruled from I think 1153 to 1180. I might have that first year wrong, but like around that time, like he was essentially running the show religiously, and of course this goes back pre-schism, right? You've got sometimes emperors being tyrants trying to impose the doctrine on, and Timothy Flanders' book that's going to come out pretty soon is very good on this. I recommend that to everyone. I've read an ARC advanced copy, but of course I'm going to buy the paper copy. Now, Elijah, I'm finally going to answer your question that I've had for about 10 minutes on the screen. Alan Rule, did you hear about the debate between Jay Dyer and Trent Horn? Has that happened yet? I don't think
it's about to happen. It's coming out on Swan Sasana's channel. I'm probably butchering his last name. Elijah said that. Yeah. Although I want to say this much, Trent is going to have an easy time with this debate, if you ask me, because if you look at St. John Damascene, if you look at St. Gregory of Palamas, they use natural theology in their works. They even
Maximus the Confessor uses it too.
Yeah, they all prove God's existence from the created things of the world. I don't know how you can say, oh, they do, but I'm going to use presuppositional apologetics and a transcendental argument to boot.
Well, yeah, but I think Jay, although I've criticized Jay in the past, he talks about things he essentially shouldn't be talking about. This is his field, though, so he. Used to be an easy time for Trent Horn. I don't know, because this is Jay's strong side, in my opinion. And you might say he's trying to bluff it by, but still, it's his. In my opinion, it's his strongest stuff. Like, it's not like they're debating something else about the papacy or Vatican II or something.
Has he debated this topic before? Because from what I've seen, all he's done is make these claims like through his video streams, and those.
Well, who knows? We'll just have to watch the debate and see, I guess. And Elijah said it's coming out on Swansona's channel. And our good Italian friend said, I would like to know if the Traditionalist Rite about the diaconus and the others, about the bishops, have preceded the same evolutions than the one for the priests before and after the Tridentine for Rome. John?
So I couldn't really, I really couldn't speak about the development of the traditional Latin Mass and the Tridentine Rite. But what I can say is, if you look at some other evolutions of masses within the church, the Maronites actually came up with their own mass in like the 9th century. And that was pretty much from the ground up. And some people like to say, oh, that was just a council decided by a bunch of petty functionaries coming together. Well, sometimes that does happen within church history. It seems abrupt, but if it was organized and approved of by the bishops, it's approved, and that's that. However, something else to point out is we also have evolutions as well. So if you look at the rites before they were suppressed, like the Sarum Rite, for example, that was a kind of Roman rite. It's hardly called a rite. It's actually called a use, because there's kind of a gradualism between what a use is and what a rite is and all that stuff. So you did have different uses, and those uses would constitute different degrees of a mass from as opposed to a rite. So it's because of the fact that you did have different uses that you could say that there was an evolution of sorts.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that. No, it's coming out soon. He's probably talking about the Trent Horn, Jay Dyer debate. Yeah, no, I look forward to seeing that. And I got a few debates to catch up on. There's been some good debates out lately. So yeah, I still got to finish Timothy Flanders and Tim Gordon, two Tim square off.
I definitely do want to watch Tim Square debate. That sounds good to me as well.
Yeah, Tim Square.
Although I would say I do like the format I'm trying to venture into, which is just recording it and just giving the pieces like in a back and forth context. It allows the debate to be bite-sized, and you get multiple viewers over time. Excuse me. Plus, you could always play it in a list, and that just accumulates your viewers. So, yeah, nice tip for anyone out there.
Okay. Are there any more questions? If not, we will shut this down. It's a very interesting topic, John. Thanks for coming on to debate this. I don't know if there's any other Catholic apologists who do what you do.
Yeah, so thanks. And there was a good reason that inspired me to take this on. It's because, well, with Father James, I just didn't like the way he was smack talking Pope Leo the 13th. And Pope Leo is just amazing. So I'm going to defend my guy. But with the sedevacantists, I hate the idea that they would just. There's a friend that I know in real life. Apparently, he would refuse to go to a Novus Ordo for confession because he just didn't consider them to be valid priests. And in my mind, I think that this is the danger of this sort of theology. You lead people away from their confessional and you lead them towards sin, and you create a huge amount of distrust. And if that's the case, then it's really sad what can happen to a person. You're also just creating a huge form of skepticism in the normal way people receive the sacraments. And if that's true, you're leading people to hell. And
that's not cool. This is a really good question. Why do Catholics say a bishop can be validly ordained by only one bishop instead of three? I know Catholics usually do three bishops, but they say one bishop can ordain another if needed. John?
Oh, right. So that's because we want to minimize. So there are two arguments given. The weaker one is just to say it's ceremonial in nature, but I don't think that really holds up. Are we really just going to say a bunch of bishops gather around from their diocese for purely formal ceremonial reasons at a time when travel was a pretty out of the way thing? The stronger reason or explanation is you got three bishops because you wanted to minimize the chance that there was an invalid ordination. So if there was two bishops and one just withheld intent, then at least you got the intent from the other two bishops, or introduce a false, or maybe one of them decided, or maybe one of them was just invalidly ordained themselves.
Yeah, they're co-consecrators essentially.
Yeah, exactly. They're co-consecrators. So it minimized invalid ordinations. Now, what's really interesting is it could still be undermined if you don't have a valid priest, because ordaining a priest only requires one bishop. So that does add a little level of tension. But yeah, at the very least, it minimizes. It doesn't completely eliminate it.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no, that's an interesting. I think Father James said that Anglicans do some similar, like with the floating bishops, and just for security. Coming from an EO, well, EOs are always welcome on this channel. I love dialoguing with them, just like I love dialoguing with Protestants and Muslims and Jews. And also, sorry for my spell. Don't worry, I spell things wrong all the time. All right. John, any last words? I'm going to kill the stream.
All right. I just wanted to say goodbye, everyone. And Ivan, arrivederci.
Arrivederci. And I want to say today is also, the nerd in me is going to come out. It's the anniversary of the Battle of Hastings. When William the Conqueror defeated Harold Godwinson on that day. It's an interesting battle. If you study the battle, I got some primary sources on it there. But but thank you, John, for everything. And by the way, there's going to be a video with John and I in the future, probably pretty soon. I won't tell you all the juicy details behind that one, but it's going to be an interesting topic. But and expect more videos from me, and I'm sure John will have some more as well. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. God bless.
God bless.